tripping, man.
Yeah. Yeah, you can tell.
The first rule of the complete history of Tetris the Grandmaster is that you can never trust anything I say, although this is less due to intentional deception and more because I keep finding out new things as I'm writing this. For example, it turns out there was actually a public playtest of TGM3 before the Textmaster debacle. Well, kind of. At the end of January, a single cabinet appeared at the Ofener Game Club for one afternoon, specifically to test one of the game's new modes, and as such, only this mode was playable. It was called Shirase, meaning obituary, aka the successor to death. It was somewhat of a disappointment though. Since the hold and the extra next pieces seemed to have been removed for this test, it was effectively just death but faster, and most of the top players fell apart around 500. The furthest was Jin, who made it to 570. The August location test was far more exciting. It brought in the extra next pieces, the ability to hold, and the option to choose between the two rules. The community was beginning to realize just how much easier it was to go extremely fast once you get used to using hold and factoring in the additional next pieces. They were turning out to be pretty decent additions to the series. Mihi's is vindicated. The location test also came with a second playable mode named Kamui. It seemed to have a 5-minute time limit and the same set of pieces each game, and supposedly it would work with the card system and match your skill level in some way. It was just weird. Very few people were playing it compared to Shirase. By the time of the second major test in October, a lot had changed. Kamui was gone, replaced with Easy, TGM3's equivalent to Normal, and Master, TGM3's equivalent to Master. Man, you know what I miss? Card Captor Sakura. And Mihara did too, because Etahar had made its way into TGM3 as the brand new Sakura mode, which if you couldn't tell is basically just Flashpoint. The game was also still distinctly lacking the card system. In fact, the game was no longer even running on the Naomi at all, but instead the Windows-based Taito Type X. It was soon revealed that the card system had been done away with entirely in favor of an account system on each machine. Players would have their best scores in each mode saved to their account, but it seemed they wouldn't be able to carry this data between machines. The reason for this downgrade is still unclear. Tetris the Grandmaster 3 Terror Instinct was officially released on the 28th of February 2005. The final selection of modes was Easy, Master, Sakura, and Shirase, but Easy and Sakura are both side modes with gimmicks, so the community mainly focused on Master and Shirase. Heading into Master, the score takes even more of a back seat compared to the previous games. Whereas TA removed score as the determining factor for Master mode grades, TI now removes it from the screen entirely, only displaying it at the end of each game. I mean, why even bother including it at that point? The end screen also includes some statistics for the game, and it does not tell you what any of them mean. The bar graph measures your general performance every 50 levels. It accounts for both your speed and how clean your stack is. The pentagon tracks your overall speed and cleanliness. The pink metric is for the level you reached, and the blue metric is completely random. Why did they do this? Master's gameplay is largely similar to Tap, although the rate the gravity increases is now dynamic. It depends on how well the player is doing, meaning for faster players, 20G can start as early as level 300. There is also now a 7-minute time requirement to continue past level 500. These time requirements are known as Torikans, an abbreviation of an abbreviation roughly meaning maxed out for the time being. Master still has grades for each game, and considerably more than in Tap. We'll talk about those later. But players also have a qualified class that saves to their account and represents their general skill level. If your recent master runs are consistently graded higher than your current class, you'll receive a promotional exam that you must also achieve a certain grade on in order to attain that class for your account. The result of this is that overall consistency is strongly encouraged over risk-taking. Consistency is also encouraged in each game, as each 100 level section can give you a cool if you complete it fast enough, or a regret if you complete it slow enough, and this does affect your grade. TI also contains the same two types of credit rolls, and performing well in these rolls also adds to your grade. Oh, and if you suck too much you can receive a demotional exam as well. So Master is faster, but it's still a disaster as reminders of your skill are plastered, and until you surpass your past abilities the lasting frustration will supplant your memories. Basically, the exam system makes gameplay considerably more stressful, which made it a highly controversial addition. I mean, who looks at a video game and goes, you know what would make this more fun? Exams. At the time of TI's release, it wasn't clear how far away the top tap players were from the GM grade. In fact, nobody knew anything about the GM grade. All they knew was that the fan favorite to get there was Hachioji's own Gen 8, whose classic Shirase PB was just over 800 from the location tests. Despite not being big on death, Gen 8 found himself surprisingly addicted to Shirase, quickly taking the lead for classic rule. The other top contender was a player named 309 who currently held the record for death. But what about the world side? The guideline had been in place for a few years now, so anyone who was enough of a Tetris fan to play both TGM and guideline would have a pretty big leg up, especially in a scene where most players refused to play world rule. The perfect man for the job was the self-proclaimed Tetris demon Corian. Corian had been playing Tetris for a long time. He had maxed out Sega's Tetris back in 1992 at just 15 years old, and since then he had been playing and mastering a wide variety of Tetris games. In mid-2002 he became one of just a handful of death GMs, and he was quite fast at TGM1 as well. He also had the advantage that he had attended most of the location tests for TI, and at the time of release his Shirase PBs were 669 in Classic and 575 in World. The World PB seemed to be the record at the time, owing both to his broad skill in Tetris and his willingness to actually play World Rule. And even if it wasn't, he was sure he could do better. On the Master side, Corian was qualified M6 on both Classic and World, with Gen 8 presumably slightly ahead on Classic. But how many grades were between them and GM? And does Shirase have a GM? This is gonna be fun. On the 19th of February, a week before TI's official release, an exhibition was held at the 2005 AOU Amusement Expo, giving top players an opportunity to flex their Shirase skills in front of a large crowd. Anyone who reached level 500, even if they were stopped by the Torikan, would receive a prize. Gen 8 and Kuroda both topped out just short of 500, before Corian, the only one who chose World Rule, defeated the Torikan and topped out just after 500. Gen 8 also broke through on his second attempt, making it into the 600s. That's the run you're seeing now. You might have noticed that in case Shirase's speed wasn't sadistic enough, you also start to receive rising garbage after 500, similar to TGM Plus, aka Block Seed. This means that if you can't clean up your stack, it'll get pushed upwards until you top out, which is exactly what happens to Gen 8. He would get another opportunity later in the day, setting a new PB of 888. TI arrived at Corian's local arcade on March 1st. He arrived to find HRB already playing, and he began practicing exclusively on World, setting a new Shirase PB of 796. By March 5th it was up to 910. Then on March 9th, with HRB watching, Corian achieved 1186. So yeah, Shirase keeps going after 1000. In addition, once you reach 1000, a new gimmick appears. The pieces all become monochrome, with a pattern referencing the original Tetris from 1985. As such, the community named these the Ancestor blocks. I don't think I have to explain why this makes playing more difficult. Corian learned that Gen8 and 309 had both already passed 1000 on Classic, and that for them the blocks were white instead of green. On the 13th, many of the top players got together to determine who was leading in skill. 309 was probably the fastest Shirase player in the nation, having grown quite adept with hold, but neither he nor Gen8 managed to make it over 1000 again. Corian, the world record holder, pulled off an astounding 1248. The group was shocked to find that the speed was still increasing coming into 1200. At this point it was on the verge of impossibility. TI is sadistic in many ways. Gen8 proved to be the leader for Master, having pulled off a game ranked Master K. The grades were getting stranger after M9. Master K? Who knows what's next? On the 15th, Corian managed a Master ranked game in World, before breaking his Shirase PB thrice over the next 2 weeks. Then, on the 30th, Corian hit 1300 and reached the credit roll. And it seemed to be the actual end this time, not a Torikhan, since this roll was somewhat different. This is big. If this was the true credit roll, then it appeared there was no GM for Shirase, with the highest grade being S13. Clearing the roll simply makes it orange. However, the next day, Mihara stated that Shirase's 1300 was yet another Torikhan, and that the mode went as far as 1600. But I mean, it had already been proven that he had lied about Tap's grades, and besides, it was April 1st, can we really trust him? Corian decided to switch to practicing Classic, which turned out to be useful for another TI tournament at the beginning of May, which only allowed Classic rule. Gen8 was the favourite to win for Master, but thanks to a lucky game, the winner ended up being the other Gen. Quite a few players had made it over 1000 in Shirase by this point, but the tournament performance was underwhelming. On the 12th of May, Corian managed to overtake Gen8 with a new classic Shirase record of 1149. The next day, Gen8 arrived at the arcade to see Corian playing. He then immediately pulled off a 1202. This may not have actually been his record though. He had recently impulse bought a TI board to play at home, which he was doing nearly every free moment he had. He was still visiting the arcade occasionally for some reason. Over the next few months, he would push his best Master grade even higher, achieving Master V, then Master O, and finally Master M in November. But despite getting some really good runs, there wasn't any evidence of a GM grade. If it did exist, clearly you had to play perfectly. Despite the really impressive top players, not a huge number of people were playing TI. Many were still playing Tap, or had simply lost interest in the series due to the recurring arcade costs. But these people were in luck. On the 13th of May, Arika announced that a new TGM game was in development as an Xbox 360 launch title, tentatively named T4. They had the license this time. There were no new clones being developed. Surely, nothing can go wrong in between now and November, right? Right? By 2005, most of the people playing TGM outside Japan had coalesced within the QuakeNet IRC network, which had quickly become the central location to discuss the game. One of the early members of this nascent community was the Swedish Lost, who began playing all the way back in 2001 after seeing Tetris Japan finals. Although with close to zero outside information about TGM1, his rate of progress was extremely slow. In fact, he wasn't even aware that TGM1 had a GM grade until August of 2005, when he decided to post a video of one of his runs to the Zinc forums, only to discover that multiple Western players had already achieved GM, and that most discussion was now taking place in the IRC channel. He was invited by the Canadian Color Thief, who had first achieved GM around a year prior. But CT was only the second player to achieve it. He had been chatting with and learning from from the French Jago, who first managed GM in November 2003. Thank you, Tyler Durden. Due to the overall lack of awareness about the game outside of Japan, the community's growth was at a snail's pace, and with no English guides, no resources, and starting half a decade behind, the few active Western players were leagues behind the Japanese community. By the time of Lost's appearance, Jago was still the top player, and one of only two who had managed a time under 11 minutes. Although Lost now had a community to help him gain some skill, he was disappointed to find that the game that inspired him to start playing TGM still wasn't available outside Japan, and it would remain unavailable for 2 weeks. By coincidence, someone had bought TA and TAP arcade boards back in April, and by June they had arrived in the hands of a MAME contributor named Guru. After a grueling 2-month wait, the 2 ROMs were dumped on August 22nd, and a few days later they had been added to MAME version 0.99 Update 4. This was huge news. Working emulated versions of both TA and TAP were now available to play for 3 entire days. Nearly immediately after the ROMs were added to MAME, Eureka caught wind and sent the development team a takedown request. So, on the 28th, version 0.99U5 was released with TA and TAP removed, along with all download links for 99U4. But it was already too late. Once you have the files, you have the files. Both the Western and Japanese communities were now privately sharing 99U4 amongst each other in order to play TAP at home. Mihara was sweating buckets. TGM1 was still available on MAME, so policing TAP was clearly more important, either for financial reasons or TTC reasons or both. Either way, Mihara really didn't want anything interfering with the new release, and the Japanese community agreed. If they got an official game on even one home console, that would still slash the need for emulation. However, T4 was planned to be exclusive to Japan, so there was no incentive for the Western community to stop sharing clones and emulators other than to make Eureka happy. But the Western community was still like 8 people. The far more pressing issue came in October when a video of an extremely impressive death run began circulating around the Japanese forums. Not only was this video recorded on MAME, but it also turned out to be a cheated run, likely achieved by using MAME to slow down the game. Eventually, this video caught the attention of TTC, who were very unimpressed. Eureka was lucky that T4 wasn't cancelled, but they had apparently been penalised in some undeclared way. I wish I could tell you. As expected, Mihara took it quite hard. No matter, T4 was still happening, and its official name was revealed: Tetris the Grandmaster Ace. And it looked promising. It came with online battles, a wide variety of modes, and it was in HD. This was everything the community had been waiting for. It was a precarious road to get here, and it took some time, but it's finally paying off. And it could be the start of a whole new chapter for the series. December 2005. The fans are hyped. The Xbox 360 launches in Japan and Ace along with it. The players boot it up and it sucks. Beyond the part about being a Japanese Xbox 360 exclusive, Ace has some issues. For one, a large portion of the content was locked behind an Xbox Live Gold membership, which costs just under 800 yen a month. The Xbox Live integration was actually a selling point because it provides access to the online battles, but the membership is also required to access some of the offline content, such as the harder modes. Not that these modes are particularly difficult to beat, because both rules now come with infinite move resets and the Torikans are gone. In fact, all of the main modes are now centered around clearing 150 lines, doing away with TGM's usual level system entirely. The credits aren't even playable, you just kind of sit through them. Ace as a whole is generally more guideline compared to TI. For example, the sonic drop is gone, replaced with a regular hard drop, while the soft drop is slower and doesn't instantly lock upon landing. Mihara clearly wasn't happy with these changes, because there also exists a hidden alternate version of Classic Rule with the normal TGM locking system, a fact he hinted at multiple times. In a later update, this alternate version was just added to the settings. A lot of the graphics are copied straight from TI, although the Classic Rule piece colors are now switched to fit the guideline. The online battles ended up being buggy, poorly balanced, and ended extremely quickly, a hard sell considering the monthly subscription requirement. The exams are still present, although they work slightly differently, and to top it all off, the game has no GM grade, the thing that is in the name. Ace simply doesn't add anything new to the TGM series, and it was a deeply underwhelming game for the 360, a console that also did not sell very well in Japan. In late 2011, Valve CEO Gabe Newell pointed out, now famously, that piracy is almost always a service problem, not a pricing problem. If piracy of your product is rampant, it's often simply because the pirates are offering a better service than you are. Applying this mindset is part of what led to Steam's complete dominance of the gaming distribution market, as well as Valve's consistently positive reputation compared to other game companies. Ace isn't terrible, all things considered, but the community already had better, more widely available free options, so why bother? Ace feels unfinished, it looks unfinished, and it probably was unfinished. Apparently, the Xbox launch release was just too tight a schedule for Eureka, which probably explains some of its issues. Even being able to battle people over the internet wasn't a selling point for long. Mere months after Ace's release, Nintendo released Tetris DS, an online Tetris game so much more enjoyable than Ace that despite being entirely guideline, most TGM players still preferred it. Interesting thing about Tetris DS, a much earlier version of it without any online features began development all the way back in 2004, not by Nintendo but instead our old pals THQ. They planned to release it in March 2005, a timely 4 months after the DS's release, but they would never get the chance. TTC decided to backstab them and revoke their rights out of nowhere, presumably because Nintendo decided they wanted to handle Tetris for the DS, and well, it's their console. I think Nintendo might be the only company TTC hasn't pulled along. THQ responded by taking them to court, which went on up until early 2006 when they came to an agreement. This agreement included THQ receiving Tetris rights for the Xbox 360, prompting speculation that they may have been planning to port Ace to the West. This would be big news, even with all of Ace's issues, as the Western community would finally have a legal way to play a TGM game, and it could help spread the series outside Japan. Unfortunately, it turned out that THQ actually decided to make their own game for the 360, the deeply boring Tetris Evolution, complete with its own Xbox Live multiplayer that nobody really cared about. We should lighten the mood. Let's lighten the mood by checking up on our top TI players. About a week before Ace's release, Gen 8 had managed to reach qualified MO. However, he wasn't achieving any games higher than MM, nor was he achieving it consistently enough to get the promotional exam. The struggle for MM continued into January, then February, March, April, May. The unthinkable was happening. Gen 8 had completely plateaued. What he wasn't aware of was that he was technically achieving GM games, he just didn't know it. See, GM is the next grade above MM, but even if you perform extraordinarily well in both the game and the role, your GM grade will still display as MM. The only way to get a GM game is to get the GM qualification, and that means playing multiple games consistently at GM until you get the exam. By the end of 2006, Gen 8's qualified grade had gone up and down, but never higher than MO, and this long plateau meant that other players were beginning to catch up in skill. Corian was now only occasionally playing, just enough to keep his skill from slipping, but he was now far behind in Classic. The record for Shirase was neck and neck between 309 and a promising newcomer named Aya, whose qualified rank was sitting around M to MK at the time. Also sitting around this point was another promising player by the name of Khan, who was more focused on Master. In November 2006, Khan qualified MV for the first time, and in March 2007 he qualified MO, but just 3 days later, Gen 8 finally qualified MM. He had escaped the plateau, but Khan would not fall victim to the plateau. He also qualified MM in June. Finally, on July 28th, over 2 years since TI's release, it happened. The first GM was Gen 8. Khan was the second, but he ended up having more trouble. It took him until December. Of course, Erika took the opportunity to upload the video of Gen 8's run, which, like Tetris Japan Finals, quickly went viral. And, like Tetris Japan Finals, it was about to summon a new wave of international interest. Back in May of 2005, a Tetris player named Caffeine, disheartened by the lack of a unified Tetris information website, decided to start his own, which he called Tetris Concept. The new site contained a blog, a wiki, and, starting in November, a forum. This forum soon grew to become the central public location to discuss TGM alongside QuakeNet, and so the rate of new members finally began to pick up. In September 2006, Jago became the second Western player to achieve Death M behind an American player named Matt, and his TGM1 PB was down to a 1024. Coming into 07, around a dozen people had achieved GMs in total, with more soon to come as Gen 8's brand new video would bring in more curious people. Soon, Jago had also become the first Western Master M, and he was now focusing on the M role, with CT not far behind. And finally, in February 2008, CT became the first Death GM. Also, physical meetups were finally starting to happen, albeit few and far between due to the player base's large spread.
I got gold ST and I'm playing fucking one-handed, bitches.
It's worth noting that by this point TI was still unavailable on any kind of emulator, and buying an arcade board was prohibitively expensive, so unsurprisingly a variety of clones had been created and modded to emulate its modes. In fact, the quantity of clones in general was exploding, both inside and outside Japan, so let's reassess the clone situation. Heberus UE had been in continuous development up until August 2007, by which point it contained replicas of nearly every mode from TGM1, TAP, TI, and even ACE, and it was highly customizable with a wide range of rule sets, including DTETs. Because of all the features, Heberus had grown to become by far the most popular clone, although Hoshiken would eventually take the original Heberus down, just before development also ceased on UE. More on that later. Also around mid-2007, a player by the name of Report began work on another clone, which by 2008 was gaining traction as an alternative to Heberus. However, this wasn't actually a new clone, it was just Textmaster again. It turns out when Trio shared the original game, he also made the source code available, and so Report had begun working on an updated version with new graphics and sounds. And this version has a Counter-Strike theme? since report spoke both English and Japanese, he shared the game in both sides of the community, although the Western side, having not been through the original Textmaster incident, was far less discreet in sharing and discussing it. There were also a lot of smaller clones made by various people, either to serve specific niches or just to have made one. There were three contributing factors to this. A, as we know, coding a Tetris game is extremely easy. B, coding a TGM game is not much harder. And C, these people are all massive nerds. The earlier Japanese community did make a few smaller Tetris clones as well, but Tetris Concept was going big on small-time clones. Jago made a clone, Lost made two, one of which had fancy backgrounds and music from a friend named Simon, who happened to be an artist. Some of their childhood experiences together would later go on to form the basis for Simon's debut graphic novel, Tales from the Loop, although today he's best known for his best-selling novel, The Electric State, which was later adapted into a black hole for money. There was even a TGM clone made for the DS. More people than ever were playing clones, and they were not subtle about it, much to Mihara's frustration. In fact, by 2007, this situation was already reaching a boiling point. Back in late 2006, Mihara had begun to discuss clones again in light of the rapidly devolving situation. The Japanese community was playing more clones because of how lackluster Ace was, and the Western community was playing more clones because they didn't have any other choice. And there was another factor making things more difficult as well. Over the course of 2005 and 2006, the new video sharing site YouTube was growing into a massive household name, and thus, naturally, it was becoming the go-to place to share videos of TGM, as we've seen, as well as its clones. Forget the one video of MAME going around file upload sites. Millions of people now had easy access to videos of both clones and emulations of the series. You might have noticed the viral Gen 8 video wasn't even posted by Eureka, and their webpage still warned against reposting videos, but the dude who uploaded it to YouTube probably couldn't even read Japanese. Would you be surprised to learn that he was a member of Tetris Concept? To make matters worse, Japan's own popular video sharing site Nico Nico Doga appeared in December 2006. This issue continued to build and build until Eureka finally folded in early 2007, and they begun sending takedown requests en masse to almost every TGM related video across the internet. This included clone games, emulators, some of the re-uploads of Eureka's promotional videos including Tetris Japan Finals, and basically any video which wasn't obviously a real arcade cabinet. And since these requests came in waves instead of all at once, any YouTube channels with multiple infringing videos would quickly rack up strikes and end up deleted entirely. This is also part of the reason I have so little footage from this period. Very frustrating. It was also frustrating for players trying to share the TGM series with a wider audience, although Mihara didn't really want anyone outside Japan finding it anyway. As the Western community grew, he was growing to resent it more and more, even as the Japanese community welcomed them with open arms. The Western community, on the other hand, barely knew anything about Mihara or his complicated thoughts on clones. They only saw the mass takedowns, so friction was forming. By June and July, Mihara's ire towards the clones themselves had also intensified again, and he began to subtly hint his dissatisfaction with Heberus specifically, while trying not to name it directly. Realizing the writing on the wall, Hoshiken decided to take down the original Heberus, which then prompted the people working on UE to cease development as well. Textmaster's development hadn't yet picked up again at this point, but it wouldn't receive quite as much attention in Japan anyway. Why does it matter what country it's popular in? Well, although it's possible Eureka wanted to take down clones and videos anyway, it's almost certain that TTC was simply placing pressure on them again. But Eureka wasn't working on another TGM game, so what's the deal? Well, Henk may be the one to blame this time. Back in 2005, he came to the conclusion that the future of Tetris would be online multiplayer.
Tetris! Back-to-back Tetris! back-to-back T-spin.
And thus he formed two new companies in collaboration with Minoru Arakawa, Tetris Online and Tetris Online Japan. Tetris Online Japan's first game was released in June 2007, note the timing, also named Tetris Online, although in the West it was colloquially referred to as Tetris Online Japan. Try not to get confused. TTC likely viewed Heberus and the other TGM clones as potential competitors to TOJ, partly because TOJ had a 20G mode, and in case you think that sounds like fun, the game was also pay to win. TOJ was shockingly ahead of its time in the scummy microtransaction department. You had to buy things such as more next pieces and faster movement using the in-game Tetris points, which could be gained by playing the game a lot but was far easier to obtain just by paying money. And by paying I mean there was a premium subscription. And gambling. Coming into 2008, Mihara was finding that the mass takedowns were doing nothing to slow the exponential growth of Tetris Concept. On the other hand, the Tetris Concept members were finding that the takedowns weren't stopping, although their scope was now restricted just to videos of clones. Anytime someone uploaded a video of Heberus or Textmaster, it was almost immediately taken down, as well as videos of more general Tetris fan games that happened to include TGM-like mechanics, such as Lockjaw. But this wasn't even about Tetris Online anymore. In fact, TTC had likely stopped placing pressure on Eureka, so why were they still putting in the effort? Well, if it wasn't because of some other company's TGM-like game, it had to be because Eureka was seeking a license again. And indeed they were. Over the course of 2007, Mihara had been hinting that he planned to develop a fourth mainline TGM game, and now he was finally going for it, which meant Eureka had to do everything they could to appease TTC. In Mihara's words, letting clones and clone videos run rampant would indicate to TTC that there was no need to license a new official game. It's just the same catch-22 again, only worse this time thanks to YouTube's prevalence. By this point, practically all the odds were stacked against Mihara. For one, he was claiming that again, Eureka would only be able to obtain an arcade license. I mean, this was not the 90s anymore, even Japanese arcades were falling out of fashion. That's probably why an arcade license was so easy to acquire, but TTC were not treating the series well. The most frustrating part is that Henk seemed to like the TGM series a great deal, but alas, he was not the only decision maker in TTC, and even if he was, the money came first. Mihara was not oblivious. He knew that even if he did get another arcade game released, it would probably struggle to break even. Almost nobody was interested in another arcade game. Everyone wanted console ports and international releases, and he was trying for those as well, but like always, he was getting nowhere. In terms of pushing the bar for skill, TI was already testing humanity's limits. A third classic GM had appeared in February, but nobody else was even close to achieving it in either rule. On top of all this, yet another new clone was growing in popularity, named Null Pamino.
A lot of people have been requesting that I teach people how to play Tetris. So I want to show you in this episode some basic stacking patterns.
TGM's once unique mechanics had now spread to a variety of other Tetris games, usually in the form of a 20G master mode. Tetris New Century, a guideline remake of Sega's Tetris, Tetris Zone, Tetris Online Japan, Tetris Friends, Tetris Party, and more all had 20G modes. But the first was our old friend Tetris DS. Did Tetris DS steal the idea from the TGM series? Maybe. I mean, it's impossible to say for sure. There's always the chance that Nintendo did just come up with the same idea themselves. But imagine you're in Mihara's shoes. You have an idea for a new type of Tetris game. It's successful and you want to put it on home consoles. You get rejected time and time again, and then, over the course of a few years, the idea you pioneered gets grafted onto everyone else's games. I would be crushed. But somehow, Mihara still wasn't crushed. He was completely dedicated to releasing another TGM game, no matter the cost. Even if it meant alienating everyone outside Japan. Even if it meant putting out a 4th arcade exclusive. Even if it meant convincing Eureka to take a loss. Mihara was going to release TGM4 or die trying.